Welcome to the program. My name is Marty Schenkman. I'm joined by a friend and colleague, Jonathan Blattmacher. We are going to attempt somehow to cover a topic as complex and important and detailed as powers of appointment in a quick 10-minute overview. Keep in mind that all the video clips, including this on Law Easier for educational purposes only, don't take any action without getting appropriate professional advice. Powers of appointment, by the way, are really complicated. Make sure that you get the advice of somebody that does understand them. Jonathan, maybe you can give us a definition and then I'll give an example of what a power of appointment is.
A power of appointment is control over the disposition of property that you don't own. And that occurs by normally giving someone the power to specify where the property will go that is held in a trust. The mom creates a trust for her daughter. In the trust, mom gives daughter the power to direct in the daughter's will, although we will come back and say that's not a good idea to limit it to a will, who would receive the property at the daughter's death. That's kind of a typical power of appointment.
These things are ubiquitous in planning. You will see them in myriads of different forms in lots of different trusts. And in many cases where they should be in trust, they're absent. So hopefully we can give you some insight quickly as to why you want to address them. This is a very general, quick overview. There's myriads of variations of powers of appointment, but just for our quick overview, there's two flavors of powers that we're going to mention. One is a general power of appointment, which causes the assets to be included in the power holder's estate. So if the daughter could appoint to anyone, including her creditors, herself, or estate in that trust, that would cause estate inclusion for tax purposes. But it may also, which is very important because many people are not subject to estate tax, could cause those assets to be reached by the daughter, the power holder, in our simple examples, creditors. So very, very important to understand what the scope of a power is when you're drafting it, or if you have a trust, what it is. A limited power of appointment, in contrast, where the daughter could appoint, say, only to descendants of her parents or grandparents, would not generally cause inclusion in the power holder's estate and should not cause the assets to be reached by creditors of the daughter in our example. The reason I said generally about estate inclusion is if a individual, if you create a trust for your family and you retain a power, that may very well cause an incomplete gift or transfer and cause estate inclusion. Jonathan, why is this so important? Why do people want to use these things?
Well, let me mention that there are many, many other differences in powers of appointment. There are imperative powers, and there are discretionary powers, and a variety. But you want these in almost all trusts to permit flexibility. And one of the things that people sometimes say, well, what if my son or daughter or grandchild wants to exercise the power in an untoward way? Well, one of the things that you can do, and I did this more and more in my practice, is to say that the power can only be exercised with the prior consent of the independent trustee. And Marty and I both feel you need an independent trustee. So again, if someone wants to exercise the power in a way that is not really right for the family situation, or could cause a creditor problem of one kind or another, you can put in that it has to be exercised only with the prior consent of the trustee. Another big reason relates to taxes. You can avoid generation skipping transfer tax by having a special power of appointment, or having a general power which is exercised so it becomes included in the estate of the power holder rather than being subject to GST tax. Now, you might think that, well, it doesn't matter, estate tax and GST tax are the same. They're not. There are many differences, at least 7 that immediately come to my mind. I'm not going to go through them, but there are many. Also, you may want to change the terms of the trust by appointing it to a new trust because of changes in the law or because of changes in taxation. The power of appointment will allow you to do that. And as a consequence, you really want to do that. Also, keep in mind that a power of decanting, the ability of a trustee to pay assets in the trust over to a new trust, is also a power of appointment. It's a non-personal power. It's a fiduciary power, and there may be limits on that. But that, again, allows you to change the terms of the trust in order to get the best result that you're seeking.
Just consider for a moment the incredible power I'm sorry to not meaning to be redundant, of powers of appointment. The things that can be accomplished in a trust that Jonathan has just gone through are really incredible. And too often when people are planning trusts or reviewing trusts that even exist, not enough attention is given to this incredibly flexible, powerful planning tool, and it should be. Jonathan, you wanted to make a couple points on some tips about using powers of appointment.
Yeah, one, if you're going to grant someone a power of appointment, you're going to want to say that it can only be exercised by specific reference to the power. And the reason is that under the common law, when you have a residuary disposition in your will, if the power can be exercised by will, then you will be deemed to have exercised it. And that can cause tax and creditor problems of a great magnitude. So say, I'm giving my son, my daughter, this power of appointment, but it can only be exercised by specific reference to it. So, the daughter can say, my father created this trust for me under his will, dated so and so, or whatever specific reference you want. And I make specific reference to that power, and I hereby exercise it in the following way. Also, you want to make sure that you comply with the rule against perpetuities. In many states, such as New York and California, which are limited by the traditional lives in being plus 21 years rule against perpetuities, if you exercise the power in a greater way, say you say, I want it held in trust for 100 years in New York or California, or in fact, if you say it's any fixed period of time over 21 years, you're going to have a violation of the rule against perpetuities, and that will mean that the power is not effectively exercised at all. Also, there are things you can do with a power of appointment. For example, you've created a trust, you've given your child a special power of appointment to prevent it from being subject to his or her estate tax or to his or her creditors. But now you want it in the child's estate, for example, because you want to, for example, a tax-free step-up in basis. Well, one of the things you can do is to trigger the special Delaware tax trap, which can be used in many states, not just in Delaware, in order to cause the assets to be includable in the child's estate, even though the child doesn't own it. One of the things I strongly recommend is do not limit the exercise to a will. One of the reasons is now the entire world will know where it passed, including the Internal Revenue Service, because IRS estate tax attorneys often go down to the probate court to get the will of the decedent to see how things have been exercised. So you want to allow it to be exercised by an independent lifetime power. You can put in it has to be delivered to the trustee. You can require that it has to be notarized or whatever you want, but don't make it exercisable solely by will. At least that's my advice.
Jonathan, we have maybe a half a minute left. Let's say I have an old trust somebody created, and that old trust just didn't really think through powers and didn't really include either any powers or certainly the powers that we would like to have. Can I get the trustee to decant that trust into a new trust that is identical, but for perhaps adding a power of appointment to my child so I have more flexibility?
Well, it depends upon state law, Marty. In New York, for example, you're limited in granting a power of appointment. That's not the way I drafted the statute, but the group we had, where we had about 15 lawyers and there were at least 40 ideas that came out, I was vehemently again making it limited on what could be done. But what you'll have to do then is to move the trust to another state, for example, by Alaska, which has a special law allowing you to move a trust there, and then have the trustee exercise the power of decanting and grant the beneficiary a power to appoint at his or her death or some other time. But keep in mind, if you're worried that the child might appoint it in an untoward way, you can require the consent of an independent trustee in order for the beneficiary to exercise it.
So just keep in mind, if you have an existing old trust that doesn't have powers of appointment and you think they may be helpful in the future, look at the process of moving the trust to a state that law permits adding a trust through a decanting process if your state doesn't. And you may be able to enhance the flexibility of that trust instrument by a decanting to add a power of appointment. Incredibly powerful planning. I want to thank Jonathan for joining me. Again, everyone, please keep in mind that all the video clips on Law Easy are for educational purposes only. Thank you.